Assalamualaikum to everyone. Today we're learning what is why map is very important to us. Let's get started.
Happy birthday, buddy old pal. Go ahead, blow it out. Oh, right, no lungs. Dear Tim and Moby, what is concept mapping and what can I use it for? Thanks, Martin. Well, lots of things, Martin. A concept map is a tool for displaying your understanding of a topic. You can personalize your maps with images and all kinds of creative layouts. That makes them fun to do and useful for all kinds of learning. Well, pretty much anything. Taking notes, doing research, brainstorming ideas, even planning out projects. For instance, we could, the candle. Have you ever wondered what keeps a flame burning? Well, we can use a concept map to guide us toward the answer. Let's start with our focus question to help us stay on track. Next, we'll come up with our main idea. I'd say in this case, it's fire. I like to use a picture or a drawing to get my mind working. Now we can brainstorm related ideas. What do we know, or think we know, about fire? Right, a flame is hot, and it creates smoke. It's usually colored orange, yellow, and sometimes a bit of blue. Wood, gasoline, and candle wax all make good fuel for a fire. Fire needs oxygen too. Now, besides breath, what are some enemies of fire? Yep, wind and water work. Now that we have some starting concepts, we can start linking them together. It's good practice to put broad concepts like fuel and color closer to the main idea than specific ones like wood and yellow. So fire needs fuel, and these are some types. Make sure to label your connections, even if it's just a single word. Since this relationship has a direction to it, let's make it an arrow. Fuel types we can leave as lines, since it really doesn't matter which way you read it. And I'll give them a different shape to show that they're examples of a broader idea. Images and colors can add even more context to your map, making it easier to read. Nope, these are just my personal choices. Use whatever makes sense to you. Let's take care of the rest of these. Now we have a snapshot of our understanding of the topic. And I'm starting to see where our gaps are. Like, what is fire made of, and just how hot can a candle's flame get? These unknown concepts will help guide my research. And if I find anything unexpected, I can still include it. Fitting all this info into my map will help me understand and retain it. Instead of trying to memorize a list of new ideas, I'll be figuring out how they link up with what I already know. In other words, I'll be converting information into knowledge. Now that we've got a good-sized map, the real fun comes in, discovering crosslinks. These are connections between concepts in different areas of the map, like that the colors of a flame come from a chemical reaction, and that smoke is made of solids from the fuel. Discoveries like these enhance and deepen our understanding of the topic. It may look a bit disorganized, but it actually mimics how our brains store information. That's why you might hear these called mind maps or thought webs. They're visual models for how we think. As you learn more, you can keep adding to the edges, fitting your main idea into broader areas. Like, where does firelight fall on the light spectrum? And since heat's a form of energy, how does fire fit into that picture? Your map can also help you investigate more specific questions, like why does blowing on the candle put it out?
The next thing is similar to maps.
Ah! Dear Tim and Moby, I need to write a paper on geography. What should I talk about?
The next thing is the President Barack Obama. Let's get started.
Ugh, why did we choose to visit DC on the snowiest day of the year? My ears are about to freeze off. Lucky. Dear Tim and Moby, can you tell us about our 44th president, Barack Obama? From Zach. Sure, Zach. Barack Hussein Obama was elected president in 2008. It is a unique name, and it reflects his remarkable background. His mom was from Kansas, and his dad came from a small village in the East African nation of Kenya. They fit right into the diverse culture of Hawaii, where Obama was born in 1961. To this day, he credits his home state with shaping his political views. Its open, tolerant culture can be seen in Obama's governing style. Throughout his career, he sought to forge compromises between opposing points of view, but he governed at a time of growing partisanship, fighting between political parties that gets in the way of getting stuff done. Obama first made a name for himself by speaking out against partisanship. He was a guest speaker at the 2004 Democratic National Convention, the big get-together where the party chooses its presidential candidate. Most people had never heard of Obama. He was a brand new senator from Illinois, but he spoke stirringly of his vision for the nation. Political differences were starting to tear the country apart. Americans seemed to be splitting into increasingly hostile camps. In Washington, Republicans and Democrats could find almost no common ground. Obama reminded Americans that their shared values were far stronger than any divisions. Viewers were captivated by his energy and optimism. The wave of enthusiasm carried him to the Democratic Party's nomination for president in 2008. Running on the themes of hope and change, Obama outlined a bright vision for the country and sharply contrasted himself with the sitting president, George W. Bush. Bush was waging a war in Iraq that many Americans had come to see as a mistake, and his administration was plagued by scandal after scandal. Obama promised a government that was more responsive to ordinary folks, and not so focused on war and anti-terror efforts. Most of all, he wanted to change the tone in Washington. He said he'd bring Republicans and Democrats together to get stuff done. Yep, Obama won in a landslide, becoming the first African-American president, and the Democrats picked up majorities in both houses of Congress. That gave the party a solid mandate, the backing of the people, to fix America's problems. A financial panic earlier in the year had set off a worldwide recession or economic slowdown. Jobless rates soared, and millions of people lost their homes. In response, Democrats pushed an economic relief plan through Congress. The stimulus cut taxes and pumped hundreds of billions of dollars into the economy. And a loan to GM and Chrysler kept America's auto industry afloat. As things stabilized, Obama and his allies in Congress focused on social issues. They lifted the military's ban on LGBT service members and strengthened laws to help women get equal pay at work. But the centerpiece of their efforts was health care reform. Millions of Americans couldn't afford medical insurance. That meant they often had to go without basic health care, and if they ever needed something serious, it could bankrupt them. Fixing this problem had long been a goal of the Democratic Party. So in 2010, Congress narrowly passed the Affordable Care Act, and Obama signed it into law. Though its passage was a huge victory, it also became a potent weapon against him. Republicans fiercely opposed what they called Obamacare. They argued that it was too expensive and that they'd been shut out of the process. But mixed in with that criticism were a lot of false reports, like that the law would establish so-called death panels, government employees deciding who would and wouldn't get life-saving medicine. Some lies were aimed at Obama himself. Biased news stories implied that he wasn't an American citizen, that he was planning to revoke our constitutional rights, and that he was secretly a Muslim. Right, like that's something to be ashamed of in the first place. These fake stories had... So in 2010, Congress narrowly passed the Affordable Care Act, and Obama signed it into law. Though its passage was a huge victory, it also became a potent weapon against him. Republicans fiercely opposed what they called Obamacare. They argued that it was too expensive and that they'd been shut out of the process. But mixed in with that criticism were a lot of false reports, like that the law would establish so-called death panels, government employees deciding who would and wouldn't get life-saving medicine. Some lies were aimed at Obama himself. Biased news stories implied that he wasn't an American citizen, that he was planning to revoke our constitutional rights, and that he was secretly a Muslim. Right, like that's something to be ashamed of in the first place. These fake stories had begun when Obama was running for president. But they picked up steam during his first term, fueling the rise of the Tea Party. This was a new wing of the Republican Party. They wanted to cut government spending on health care and other social programs. Energized by Tea Party voters, Republicans took back the House of Representatives in 2010. Their stated mission: repeal the Affordable Care Act and do everything possible to oppose Obama. Denying him victories in Congress would hurt his chances for re-election. Despite this resistance, Obama achieved some major goals. He oversaw the mission to kill Osama bin Laden, the chief planner of the 9/11 terrorist attack. That same year, he ended the war in Iraq and began reducing forces in Afghanistan. Through all the pressures of his first term, he never seemed to show any signs of stress. Supporters started calling him No Drama Obama. He easily won his re-election bid in 2012. Unfortunately, Obama's relationship with Congress only grew more strained. Senate Republicans blocked his nomination for judges and other important posts. And each year, he tangled with the House over the federal budget. Within Congress, there was gridlock, an inability to pass laws on the major problems of the day. Immigration, gun violence, climate change, all of these issues went unaddressed. So in his second term, Obama used the power of the presidency to act on his own. Well, like forging a deal with Iran to halt its nuclear weapons program, and protecting the children of undocumented immigrants from being deported. Meanwhile, Obama's steady economic leadership was bearing fruit. By the end of 2016, the stock market had tripled in value from when he took office, and unemployment sank as Americans returned to work. Plus, more people than ever could afford health insurance. Well, no, there's stuff to criticize, too. Obama extended the power of the presidency in some scary ways, like increasing the use of drones to kill suspected terrorists, and using federal agencies to spy on and pressure journalists. Even if you trusted Obama with these powers, what about the next president, and the one after that? He'd also been faulted for that no-drama style of his. Some say that if he'd been more confrontational, it might have helped the situation in the Middle East. Under his administration, war and unrest spread throughout the region. Millions of people fled their countries, becoming refugees. On the home front, a lot of Obama's supporters wish he'd taken a tougher stand with Congress. If he'd called them out for blocking his agenda, maybe he could have gotten more done. True, he was elected on the promise of easing partisanship, not joining in on the fight. But maybe Washington, and the rest of the country, wasn't ready for it. In 2016, Republicans kept their hold on Congress and won the presidency as well. They're still committed to rolling back Obamacare.
Hold up. Be back.
and other projects of his. That makes it difficult to judge Obama's legacy. I think people will remember his steady leadership through troubled times. He may not have changed the tone in Washington, but he set an example of civility, even with bitter opponents. Anyway, now I'm freezing and thirsty. Think we can go get some hot chocolate? Gee, thanks.
It's Saturday. Are you ready to make this happen? Your campaign to be president of the United States? Remember? Like we talked about at the pool 3 days ago. I was going to be your campaign manager? Dear Rita and Moby, how does our country pick its president? From Sasha O. Well, Sasha, as I was saying, United States presidential... It's Saturday. Are you ready to make this happen? Your campaign to be president of the United States? Remember? Like we talked about at the pool 3 days ago. I was going to be your campaign manager? Dear Rita and Moby, how does our country pick its president? From Sasha O. Well, Sasha, as I was saying, United States presidential elections happen every 4 years. And to be honest, we're a little late to the game. It's September, so America's 2 major political parties have a huge head start. They've already picked nominees, their official choices to run for president. The Democrats are the more liberal or left-leaning party. They believe government has an obligation to take care of its citizens. Money from taxes should be used to pay for basic services and financial security. Things like health care, public education, and retirement funds.
The Republicans take a more conservative or right-leaning stance. They believe in lowering taxes and shrinking government programs. People will have more money to spend, helping businesses grow and create jobs.
Actually, boss, we've got a lot of catching up to do. Come on, let's walk and talk. Voters are already familiar with the Republican and Democratic nominees. They won their party's support in state-by-state elections, primaries, and caucuses. Traveling the country for months, they debated how to refine their party's core beliefs. They each shared their specific views on vital issues. The candidate whose ideas appealed most to voters won the party's nomination. That's the party's selection for president. The choice is officially announced at national meetings called nominating conventions. Party members gather to celebrate and drum up support for their nominee. It's a giant bash to kick off the general election, when the candidates from each party finally go head-to-head. Nope, you'll join the race as an independent or third-party candidate. You'll be a hit with voters who aren't satisfied with either major party. But you need to collect about 1 million signatures to qualify. Okay, we'll tackle that later. Follow me and I'll fill you in on fundraising. Volunteers like these help bring in donations.
Here's your third sister, and here's your third brother. Straight. That's enough. Yeah, what happened? Tell me what happened. Tell me. Tell me what happened.
Where's my quesadilla? Where's my food stick?
Yeah, we'll find it.
And where's my quesadilla? Yeah, food stick. This thing, looking at me like a bed. Actually, I don't eat popcorn.
said quesadilla.
I said quesadilla.
You have to choose.
From all over the country. Money is kind of the cornerstone of any presidential campaign. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to travel, buy ads, and pay campaign workers, not to mention organizing high-profile rallies to inspire voters. Speaking of, I've got you booked for barbecue suppers across Texas and yoga meetups all along the coast of California. Rhode Island is nice, but it's too small for us to spend much time in. The higher a state's population, the more electoral votes it gets. There are 538 in total. The candidate who can get a majority of those, 270, wins the election. Well, on election day, each state counts up its residents' votes. In almost every state, the candidate who gets the majority wins all of that state's electoral votes. This process is known as the Electoral College. It's a majority rule system, but only within individual states. Yeah, you'd think whoever wins the majority of votes across the country becomes president, but it's possible to win the popular vote and lose the electoral vote.
It happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016. She got nearly 3 million more votes than Trump, but still lost the election.
States tend to stick with one party or the other for a while. A Democratic candidate can usually count on winning these solid blue states, and Republicans can count on the red states. Swing states are the real battlegrounds of a campaign. They swing back and forth between parties from election to election, so their electoral votes tend to swing elections one way or the other. There are better ways than that to attract swing state voters, like selecting the right running mate, the vice president on your ticket. That could mean picking someone from another region of the country, or someone with a different ethnic background or gender, or with more experience in certain areas of government. These types of VPs boost the overall appeal of a ticket and pull in more votes. Running mates aren't the only way candidates try to sway undecided voters. Public debates allow them to square off face to face.
Or screen to screen, as the case may be.
Topics like the economy and foreign policy usually take center stage. But things can get ugly if candidates resort to personal insults and attack ads.
That kind of mudslinging can be way exhausting for the months leading up to Election Day.
It falls on the first Tuesday in November, as long as it's not November 1st.
Votes are counted up from polling stations across the nation, and from mail-in ballots, and the winner is usually announced pretty late at night.
Then, on January 20th, Inauguration Day, they officially take office. First, we need to make sure you meet some basic requirements. You have to be at least 35. 1,600... All right, glad there's no maximum age. And you have to be a U.S. citizen, born in the United States. But that's not a problem. Wait, where? How do you even spell that? We've got a problem, boys. Shut it down. Shut it down now.
Moby, I step out for 10 minutes, and this is what you do to my house? This is the last time.
So you need to organize all the opposition research we have
Rita.
from most to least recent.
And
And once that's done, get me Bob the lab rat's number.
Hi, Cece. Where's Barbie?
That's Ramadan's. Is that the food or the quesadilla?
Quesadilla. I think one of them has one.
Ow, that's too tight. You roll.
The next thing we know is one of the human beings the blood system. Let's get started.
Ow, that's too tight. You relax. Dear Tim and Moby, what is high blood pressure? From Eileen. Well, your heart contracts and relaxes when it pumps blood through your body. This forces blood through your arteries. Blood pressure is the force exerted by the blood on the walls of these blood vessels. Pressure waves are started by the heart's pumping action. You can feel them at the wrists and at other points where arteries lie near the surface of the body. Yeah, these are places where you can take your pulse. Blood pressure is highest during the first part of the heartbeat when the heart contracts and pushes blood into the arteries. This is called systolic blood pressure. On the second half of the heartbeat, the heart relaxes and fills with blood. The pressure here is at its lowest, and this is called diastolic blood pressure. Blood pressure is read as systolic over diastolic, like 120/80. Normal blood pressure levels are between 100 and 139 for systolic, and 80 and 89 for diastolic. Over the course of a day, your blood pressure rises and falls. It's usually lowest when you're resting. Types of stress like exercise, fear, excitement, or sudden cold will all raise your blood pressure temporarily. Anytime your heart has to work harder to pump blood faster, your blood pressure rises. Well, having high blood pressure all the time is actually a condition called hypertension. When the arteries narrow or constrict, it takes more effort to pump blood through. Artery constriction and hypertension can happen for several reasons. Getting older, being overweight, or smoking. And high blood pressure can also be hereditary. Hypertension can lead to serious problems like heart disease, strokes, and kidney failure. But doctors know plenty of ways to hypertension can lead to serious problems like heart disease, strokes, and kidney failure. But doctors know plenty of ways to treat hypertension, like getting regular exercise, low sodium or low fat diets, reducing stress, and medication. It's a good idea to keep track of your blood pressure no matter how old you are. So what is it? What's my blood pressure? What? That's impossible. It's 115/80, not 80/115. Hey, maybe we should check your blood pressure. And 34? You sure? All right. Dear Tim and Moby, what was the American Revolution like? From Liam. The American Revolution was a long and bitter war. The colonists were way outmatched. Instead of a real army, all they had were local militias, volunteer forces where soldiers could come and go as they pleased. And they were up against the British, the most powerful military in the world. The fighting began when British soldiers came to destroy a stockpile of weapons in Massachusetts. But the colonists knew they were coming. On their famous midnight ride, Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott warned leaders the British were on the march. Well, on April 19, 1775, a colonial militia met the British at Lexington, Massachusetts. The colonists numbered only 75 men against 700 redcoats. The first shots of the war were fired. When it was over, a handful of colonists were dead, along with one British soldier. The British Army marched on to Concord, Massachusetts, where more than 400 colonial Minutemen were waiting for them. The Minutemen were militia fighters who pledged to be ready at a minute's notice. They lived up to their name and forced the British into retreat. Shortly after, colonial leaders met in the Second Continental Congress. They decided to form a Continental Army led by George Washington. His first move? Cut off British troops stationed in Boston by surrounding the city. Battles erupted around the city as the British tried to break out. But Washington's army held strong, and the Redcoats were forced to flee by ship. Hooray! Believe it or not, most colonists still hoped for peace with England at this point. But Thomas Paine's famous 1776 pamphlet, Common Sense, convinced many that the only course was independence. The text highlighting question in our challenge feature has a passage from Common Sense. Check it out. Anyway, a few months after Paine published Common Sense, the Continental Congress wrote the Declaration of Independence. After it was adopted by all 13 colonies on July 4th, there was no going back. The colonies and England were at war. Despite their early successes, the colonists knew it was going to be a long fight. Getting people to join the Continental Army was a tough sell. The British had superior numbers, equipment, and training. And they were sending reinforcements. In Trenton, New Jersey, thousands of enemy troops were massing on the Delaware River. But Washington had a few tricks up his sleeve. On Christmas Day in 1776, he led his army across the icy water and launched a surprise attack. Hundreds of enemy troops were captured. After that victory, the colonial army had no trouble attracting recruits. The Battle of Saratoga in New York was another key turning point. American forces surrounded and captured an entire British army of more than 5,000 troops. An American general named Benedict Arnold helped win that one. That's right, he eventually switched sides and became a traitor for England. Meanwhile, over in Europe, Benjamin Franklin was busy charming the French. Using the news of victory at Saratoga, he secured a promise of military and financial support. The French were longtime rivals of the British and couldn't resist the chance to give them a hard time. France even convinced Spain, another enemy of England, to join the fight. The British now had to deal with many different foes on both land and sea. But the American army was still short on supplies. In the winter of 1777, more than 10,000 of Washington's troops were stationed at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. They had nowhere near enough food and slept in tiny, freezing shelters. 1 out of every 4 men died from cold, starvation, and disease. It was a low point for the war effort, but the military successes kept coming. On the sea, John Paul Jones harassed British towns and ships with small attacks. He didn't win any major victories, but it embarrassed the British Navy that they couldn't capture him. On land, American forces began to use the British Army's size against it with guerrilla warfare. No, guerrilla warfare. Instead of meeting on the open battlefield, colonial fighters staged small ambushes. British supply columns were big targets and unable to react quickly. The attacks were minor, but they kept British troops constantly on edge. The final victory came in 1781 in Yorktown, Virginia. Thousands of French and American troops trapped British forces along the coast. Meanwhile, the French Navy prevented any escape by sea. After 3 weeks of steady cannon fire, the British finally surrendered. More than 5 years of fighting had left both sides bitter. The top British general, Lord Cornwallis, refused to attend the surrender ceremony. So, Washington refused to accept the traditional sword. Yeah, I think we've gotten over it since then. Britain has been our closest ally for more than a century. Hey, where'd you go? Oh, a rematch, eh? You're on. All right, you win again. But only because that ridiculous costume was distracting me. But how did... I thought... Oh, man. I can't believe I lost to a gorilla.
A carton of cigarettes? Dear Tim and Moby, what is diabetes? Do you get it from eating too much candy? From Raichu. Doctors have known how diabetes affects the body for thousands of years. But it wasn't until the 20th century that real treatments were developed.
You don't get diabetes from eating too many sweets, but diabetes is related to sugar. Everybody has a sugar called glucose in their blood. We get this glucose from the food we eat, and our bodies use it as fuel. A hormone called insulin, produced in your pancreas, controls how much of this glucose your body's cells can absorb. This way, you have enough glucose to keep you going. This natural balance breaks down in folks with diabetes. Depending on the type of diabetes, either not enough insulin is produced,
or the body's cells can't use the insulin that is produced.
Either way, diabetes causes trouble in regulating blood sugar levels.
The full name of diabetes is diabetes mellitus. Mellitus is the Latin word for sweetened with honey, and this name describes a major symptom of the disease.
Diabetics often have sugar in their urine because their bodies are not absorbing it. Believe it or not, this is how doctors used to have to test for diabetes.
Well, now there are all sorts of ways to test for excess sugar in the blood, like blood glucose meters. When there's a lot of glucose in your blood, it's because your body's cells couldn't absorb it.
High blood glucose can make you feel tired, dizzy, or even sick. If you have diabetes, the trick is to restore balance to your body. Your doctor will prescribe a system of healthy eating and exercise that's right for you.
Well, as I said before, there are different kinds of diabetes. The disease generally comes in two forms, type 1 and type 2.
Type 2 diabetes is the most common, and it usually happens in adults.
Many people can control type 2 diabetes by changing their diet. If that doesn't work, they can usually take a pill or liquid medicine that helps control it.
Type 1 diabetes is much rarer and generally much more serious. This is the kind of diabetes that's most common in children, which is why it's sometimes called juvenile diabetes. Unlike type 2 diabetes, you can't control this form of the disease with diet alone.
People with type 1 diabetes have to take doses of insulin to make up for the insulin that the pancreas isn't producing. I'm sure it's fine.
Dear Tim and Moby, what is the distributive property? From Rachel. Well, the distributive property is a rule of math that helps us figure out problems involving multiplication and addition. For instance, we can use the distributive property to figure out how many animals are coming in today. 5 trucks are coming today, and each one is carrying 4 cows and 11 chickens. So that's 5 trucks times 4 cows plus 11 chickens. There are a couple of ways to solve the problem of how many total animals we can expect to get. Remember that we generally work with the parentheses first. It looks like in each truck there are 4 plus 11 is 15. Then we have 5 trucks, so 5 times 15 will get us our answer. So we have 75 animals coming in today. But say you don't have a calculator handy. According to the distributive property, 5 times the quantity of 4 plus 11 is the same thing as 5 times 4 plus 5 times 11. This makes it much easier. 5 times 4 is 20, and 5 times 11 is 55, and 20 plus 55 equals 75. So both methods get us 75 as the answer. We just use the distributive property to figure it out without the calculator. Here's a recap. For any numbers a, b, and c, a times a quantity b plus c is equal to a times b plus a times c. See, if you had used the distributive property, it would have been easier to figure out how many animals were coming in today. Then you could have built the fence before they got here. Apples. Ow! Dear Tim and Moby, what's the associative property all about? From Malcolm. The associative property deals with grouping numbers and works for multiplication and addition. You may not be able to mix apples and oranges, but we can add and multiply them. Let's throw some bananas in there too. We've got 6 plus 9 plus 4 equals 19 pieces of fruit. Using parentheses like this groups the apples and oranges together. It's a rule that we always do what's in the parentheses first, so 6 plus 9 equals 15, plus 4 equals 19. Right. Even if we move the parentheses and change the order of addition, our answer still comes out the same. No matter how we arrange the addends, their sum is always 19. This is an example of the associative property of addition. For any numbers a, b, and c, a plus b plus c equals a plus b plus c. The associative property works for multiplication too, but let's check it just to be sure. 6 times 9 equals 54, and 54 times 4 equals 216. 9 times 4 is 36, and 36 times 6 equals 216. It checks out. That's the associative property of multiplication. For any numbers a, b, and c, a times b times c equals a times b times c. And that's the associative property at work. Now can I have an apple? Thanks, Moby. Hey, Moby, what you doing? Dear Tim and Moby, I'm trying to study the commutative property. Can you help me? From Michelle. Sure, the commutative property is a rule about how we can add and multiply things together. For example, 2 plates plus 3 plates equals 5 plates. Now we've got 3 plates plus 2 plates, and that also equals 5. What do you mean this is baby stuff? You're the one having a tea party. Besides, I'm trying to make a point. If 3 plus 2 equals 5, and 2 plus 3 also equals 5, then 2 plus 3 must equal 3 plus 2. The order of the numbers doesn't change the sum. That's the commutative property of addition. For any numbers a and b, a plus b equals b plus a. There's a commutative property of multiplication, too. 3 times 2 equals 6. And 2 times 3 equals 6. 3 times 2 equals 2 times 3. For any numbers a and b, a times b equals b times a. There we go, the commutative property of multiplication. Hey, I'm stuck in this chair. Hey, can I have some more tea? May I please have some more tea? Can you please stop telling Houston that we have a problem? Dear Tim and Moby, who was Isaac Newton? Sincerely, Dylan. Sir Isaac Newton was an English physicist, mathematician, astronomer, and natural philosopher. Well, you don't get a reputation as one of the most... Okay, found it. Where's that letter? Dear Tim and Moby, why is Albert Einstein such a well-known guy? From Viv. Good question. Most scientists aren't household names, but Albert Einstein was one of a kind. He became a worldwide celebrity, not just for his work in physics, but also for his personality. Yeah, people's image of the friendly, absent-minded science professor with sloppy hair, that's all based on Albert Einstein. Today, his name is practically a synonym for genius. Albert Einstein was born in Ulm, Germany in 1879. He was kind of a slow starter. He didn't talk until he was 3. Yeah, it just goes to show you that people develop at different speeds. I mean, Albert taught himself geometry when he was 12. Nope, it's a myth that Einstein was bad at math. He was actually a very good student, especially in math. What is true is that he wasn't very fond of the high school he went to. The teachers were really strict, and Einstein felt there wasn't enough room for independent thought. So, when his family moved to Italy, he dropped out. Einstein eventually finished high school in Switzerland and enrolled in the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. He realized pretty quickly that physics was his calling. Physics is the study of how the natural world behaves, and math is the language used to describe this behavior. Some scientists spend their whole careers puzzling out complex mathematical equations, but Einstein was more interested in the big questions, like how does gravity really work? But he wasn't a very conscientious student. He would often cut class to go study physics on his own, or to practice the violin. He managed to graduate in 1900, but couldn't get a teaching job, mainly because his old professors wouldn't give him good recommendations. So he took whatever work he could find, as a tutor, a substitute teacher, and finally a patent office clerk. In his on his own, or to practice the violin. He managed to graduate in 1900, but couldn't get a teaching job, mainly because his old professors wouldn't give him good recommendations. So he took whatever work he could find, as a tutor, a substitute teacher, and finally a patent office clerk. In his spare time, Einstein studied physics and developed his own theories. Finally, in 1905, all the hard work started to pay off. At age 26, Einstein published 4 papers that would forever change the course of physics. They later became known as the Annus Mirabilis papers. Oh, Annus Mirabilis is Latin for wonderful year. The first paper, on the photoelectric effect, described how light acts both as a wave and as a particle at the same time. Einstein won the Nobel Prize for that one in 1921. The second paper confirmed the existence of molecules and atoms by explaining why tiny particles in a fluid move around in random, herky-jerky ways. This phenomenon is called Brownian motion. The third paper detailed Einstein's theory of special relativity. In it, he concluded that in empty space, the speed of light never changes. He also described how space and time aren't absolute. They can change depending on the vantage point of an observer. It was in his fourth paper that Einstein formulated his famous E equals mc squared equation, which basically says that energy and matter are 2 forms of the same thing. Well, some in the scientific community denounced Einstein. They disagreed with his approach to the relationship between theory and experimentation. But Einstein wasn't fazed. While he continued his job at the patent office, he started working toward becoming a physics professor. In 1911, he finally reached his goal.
After that, he moved quickly up the academic ranks. Then in 1916, Einstein published his theory of general relativity, which is a grand description of how the force of gravity works in the universe. It's a pretty complicated topic, but you can learn a lot more about it in our movie on relativity. Well, not everybody bought into his ideas right away, but over time, his theories have been largely proved by experimentation. Eventually, Einstein became an international celebrity. He used his fame to carry his message of world peace. As a German-born Jew, Einstein was uncomfortable with Adolf Hitler's rise to power. So, in 1933, he moved to Princeton, New Jersey, where he continued his research at the Institute for Advanced Study. He died in 1955 at the age of 76, but his contributions to physics and humanity live on to this day. Okay, the wig is one thing, but that's just creepy. Please take it off. Ah! Dear Tim and Moby, how does a car work? Sincerely, Stephen. Thanks for writing in, Stephen. Most cars are powered by an internal combustion engine. That's a machine that converts an explosion's energy into motion. The key to the internal combustion engine is something called the cylinder. Burning gasoline creates a tiny explosion inside the cylinders. This explosion's pressure forces another part called the piston down, which transfers the energy to the wheels. When you press down on the gas pedal, you're letting more air into the cylinders. The oxygen in the air creates a bigger explosion, which provides more power and makes the car go faster. An engine has a lot of moving parts, and that's why it needs motor oil. The oil reduces friction in the parts that rub up against one another. It also cleans the engine and prevents all those parts from overheating. Okay. There's plenty of other stuff going on inside the car, too. The transmission is a complicated set of gears.
6 in the morning for me?
Just like on a bicycle, changing gears allows your engine to operate smoothly and safely at both low
6 in the
and
morning
high
for me?
speeds. The battery is like a really big version of the small batteries you have in your house. It powers the car's electrical system, everything from the clock on your dashboard to the headlights. The brakes are discs or drums that sit near your car's wheels. They use friction to help you slow down or stop. And the suspension is the system of springs and shock absorbers that connects the body of the car to the wheels. A good suspension will allow you to drive along a bumpy road without bouncing up and down out of your seat. And it also prevents a total body collapse. Oh no, you overheated, buddy? Here you go. This should set you right. Okay, I've had it. You gonna mess around? Or you gonna help me fix this car? Okay then. Anyway, as you probably know, cars make pollution. When a combustion engine burns gasoline, it produces waste gases like carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide. They leave the car through the tailpipe and enter into the air. That's why most cars have a device called a catalytic converter, which changes harmful exhaust gases into slightly less harmful ones. Nah, they didn't have cars back then. The first automobiles were built in the 1880s, and they didn't look anything like the cars of today. They weren't too popular either. They took a lot of time to make and cost a ton of money. They were basically expensive toys for rich people. Then, in 1913, American automaker Henry Ford started building cars using a moving assembly line. This allowed cars to be built much more quickly and cheaply. Pretty soon, all sorts of people were able to buy cars. There have been a lot of new developments since then. Among the latest are hybrid cars, which run on a combination of gasoline and electricity. If you'd like to find out more about those, check out our Hybrid Cars movie. Electric cars use electric motors, which are like rechargeable batteries. That makes them friendlier to the environment and cheaper to run. Self-driving cars can drive with little help from human drivers. They use advanced technology to sense the environment and react accordingly. Wow, Moby, great job. For once, I have to thank you for sticking to an important task without goofing around at all. Or not.
Oh, yo, tomorrow interview. Tomorrow interview.
I told you I'm not here to try out. I just came to watch you.
Okay.
I'm the big winner. Dear Tim and Moby, what is self-esteem? I told you I'm not here to try out. I just came to watch you. I'm the big winner. Dear Tim and Moby, what is self-esteem and why is it important? From Julian. Good question, Julian. Self-esteem is a measure of how much you like, respect,